Well, good morning, everyone. Um, good to have you all out here. Um, just, to me, to a certain point, we should just start with the whole idea that today is Shakespeare's birthday. I'm not sure why anything is open today. I mean, it's like, it's Shakespeare's birthday. That's it. 1564, he was born. And so, around Shea Ray, that is a very important day. Stuff. But it was on this date in 1834 that Johann Anken was baptized. Now, Johann Anken was, if you talk about European Baptists, Johann Anken is like the big guy in the European Baptist universe. He was born in what was then, I believe, the Holy Roman Empire, traveled to England in the early 1830s, became a believer, came back to Germany, Holy Roman Empire, and became convinced that he needed to be baptized by immersion. And so he looked around for somebody to baptize him by immersion, could not find someone, and so he sent a letter back to England and said, "Can you come over here and baptize me and my followers?" And so somebody came over from England, they baptized him and a couple of his followers, and then he went on to become a great Baptist missionary, kind of evangelist in Europe, Germany, Netherlands, a lot of the countries, I'm sorry, villages, cities, can't remember what the word is, countries around there. So he was baptized on this date in 1834. And then it was also on this date in 1982 that Cameron Townsend died. Cameron Townsend died on this day. Cameron Townsend was a missionary linguist and was also the founder of the Wycliffe Bible Translators. But he died on this date in 1982. So I was just going to limit my stuff to just church-related stuff and important stuff to me, Shakespeare's birthday kind of thing. So that was on this date in history. Talking about what it means to be a Baptist. It's interesting, there is a book about the history of Southern Baptists that's called Not a Quiet People, the definition of the Baptist. In fact, Charles Wesley called Baptist a carnal, contentious sect.
That's not true.
Yeah. Yes. So yes, Paul is exercising his priesthood of the believer there and soul liberty, but we'll get to all of that. The first thing to point out is that it is a mistake to limit Baptist, what it means to be a Baptist, to simply baptism. Okay. Now, granted, people who are Baptists take baptism very seriously, and we'll get to that. But if you think about it, every single Christian religion and a few non-Christian ones believe in baptism in one form or another. They all do. Everybody does. Okay. Where we differ is on who gets baptized, when they get baptized, why they get baptized, and how they get baptized, which is fascinating to me when you think about it, because it's a very clear command in the Bible: go in all the world, baptizing them. Right? Nobody doubts that we're supposed to baptize people, and yet there's this huge span of understanding of what it means to baptize someone. But we'll get to what that means in a little bit. Okay, now keep in mind as I'm talking about this, there's a few things that maybe I should have put this on the handout. Being a Baptist doesn't make you a believer. Being a Baptist does not mean you're going to go to heaven. Okay, that's not the key that's going to get you in the door. Okay. By the same token, not being a Baptist doesn't mean you won't go to heaven. Okay? There are going to be non-Baptists in heaven. There are going to be a lot of non-Baptists in heaven. I mean, there may even be New York Mets fans in heaven, but I don't know, maybe not. Yeah, that might be just one step too far. But Baptists historically have looked at the elements that we're going to talk about later and said, this is how we believe God wants the church to operate. Okay? And but there are other people that are doing great works that are Presbyterians. There are Methodists that are doing great works. There are other different Lutherans that are doing other great Protestant sects, denominations, call them what you will, that are also doing great work. And you can be a believer and be in any one of those. Okay? So, be that as it may, let's go into the question of where do Baptists come from? Now, this is one of the interesting questions. So there's three ideas, basically three ideas of where Baptists came from. Or, what is our history? What is our story? Okay, where did the Baptist church first come from? Well, one idea is that Baptists have always existed. There has always been a Baptist church. Okay? Now, typically, these are referred to as Baptist, also known as landmark Baptists. Okay? So Baptists have always existed, also known as landmark, or another name is Baptist successionism. Okay? And this is the idea that there has always been a Baptist church. And the first Baptist church was in Jerusalem. James was the first pastor of the First Baptist Church, and there have been Baptist churches throughout history. Okay? It comes from, the idea of being a landmark Baptist church comes from, the name comes from the verse in Proverbs, remove not the old landmarks. There was an article written in the 1840s by a guy named James Pendleton, who wrote calling don't move the old landmarks, and that kind of galvanized the whole movement. One of the key statements that you'll hear somebody who is a landmarkist say is that Baptists are not Protestants. Okay, Baptists are not Protestants. Now this is, like with my first exposure to the history of Baptists was landmark Baptists. That this was a group that said, no, Baptists aren't Protestants. Because again, they didn't come out of the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century. They've always been there. Now they've been going on different names, Waldensians, Lollards, all these different names, whatever. I'm just picking names out of a hat here. Okay, they've always been around, and so that's where the Baptists have come from. Some of you who've been around for a while may remember this little gem of a book called The Trail of Blood. Has anybody read The Trail of Blood or heard of The Trail of Blood? This was a book that was written in the 1930s that was very instrumental in delineating what it meant to be a landmark Baptist. And basically what it does is following the Christians down through the centuries, or the history of Baptist churches from the time of Christ, their founder, to the present day. Okay? And so landmark Baptists look to, this is like one of their sources, to say, well, the Trail of Blood, and there's a whole, chart that goes along with it where you can, although it's not in this version of the book, I was really disappointed. I thought when I got it, I was going to get the chart, and it's not there. But that's landmark. They've always been around. Now, the American Baptist Association in the U.S. is a landmark Baptist association. Okay. Now, I will tell you, and I'm not going to get into the delineation, there are groups of Baptist churches. Okay, and generally they fall into one of three categories. They're either an association, they're a convention, or they're a fellowship. Depending on how they're created with each other, they're one of those three. Okay, I think there might be a fourth one in there too. I'll think about it in a minute. But the American Baptist Association is a collection of landmark churches. Okay, they're around. There's a couple of ways to know if it's a landmark church. Okay, one is they very often are called landmark church, like Landmark Baptist Church. That's a clue that this is a landmark church, if it's called Landmark Baptist Church. Okay, there is a Landmark Baptist Church in the area. I can't remember where it is. I think it's Niles or something like that. But it's that's a clue. Okay, another one, and this is my opinion. I have not been able to prove this. Okay, that if your church includes the name Temple, like if you're so and such Baptist Temple, that it's a landmark. This is my opinion just based on the number of churches that I've known of that were named Temple that were landmark churches. Another idea, and this was a discussion we had, that it could be part of the Baptist Bible Fellowship, has a tendency to call their churches temples as well. Baptist Bible Fellowship is a group of conservative churches that arose out of a 1950 split with the World Baptist Federation. By the way, it is not true that you're not a real Baptist until you've been through a church split. Just saying, okay? That's not true. So, however, it does seem that way. In fact, when you get down to, if you start looking up any organization, any Baptist organization, Southern Baptist Convention, American Baptist Association, any of those in Wikipedia, we've all used Wikipedia, right? And there'll be this thing on the Baptist, and I'll have this little piece of information, and they'll always have in there split from kind of just kind of go through that. Yeah, and we'll explain why that is when we get down here a little bit. So the trouble with, as convenient as landmark Baptists are, the landmark theory is, one of the troubles that you have with the landmark theory is that it's not really well accepted in the peer-reviewed universe. I'm trying to put this as kindly as possible, okay? That there aren't a lot of serious historians that would historians of religion that would look at it and go, oh yeah, that's where it happened, okay? And it is a little, there's a lot of assumptions that take place, especially when you get into like the Middle Ages and go into, oh yeah, in 1135 that was a Baptist church. I'm like, oh, okay, well, I was checking out their website and it doesn't say a whole lot about, but so that's one of the problems with that. But a second idea of where the Baptists came from is that we are descendants of the Anabaptists. The Anabaptists, okay? Now the Anabaptists came out of the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century. Now, for those of you who remember, or those who are familiar with it, the Protestant Reformation kicks off in the early 16th century, 1517 in Wittenberg, Germany, but with Martin Luther. But simultaneously, now Luther gets the better press, but simultaneously, or within about a year of Luther causing his problems with the Catholic Church in Germany, there was another guy in Switzerland named Ulrich Zwingli, who was also creating problems for the Catholic Church, okay? And so generally when you talk about the Reformation, there are usually two tracks. There's the Lutheran track and there's the Zwinglian track, okay? The Zwinglian track is in Geneva, Switzerland, and Luther is in Germany. Now Zwingli, in his approach to the Bible was to say, or to church, was to say, we need to throw out anything that is not in the Bible, or we just start from scratch, and we only put into our churches what's explicitly written in the Bible. Whereas Luther said that, well, we need to remove anything from our church that is not in the Bible. Now the difference is they talked about, like, if you were sorting socks, you had a sock drawer, okay? Luther would say, take all the blue ones out. Zwingli would say, dump all the socks out, only put the blue ones in. Okay, so Zwingli kind of zero bases everything. Luther kind of reforms everything. The gist of it is that it kind of broke the control of the Catholic Church, but they weren't without their own issues. Now, Zwingli had a problem in that there were a couple of guys who said, well, if you're only putting back things into the church that are in the Bible, why did you put back infant baptism? And these three guys, Conrad Grebel, Felix Mons, and George Blaurock, decided to contend. It's in the 1520s, 1525, something like that. Decided to contend with Zwingli. They lost the battle, were excommunicated, and took off. And they said, "Well, we need to baptize ourselves." And so they baptized themselves and then baptized each other, and then they became the Anabaptists, which for the Latin for being rebaptized. Okay, and these were the Anabaptists. And everybody, I love the Anabaptists. I do. I wish I was a descendant of the Anabaptists. Okay, I love the Anabaptists, but everybody hated the Anabaptists. Everybody killed the Anabaptists. There's not a lot of writing of the early Anabaptists because they didn't live long enough. I'm not trying to be funny. They really were. Everybody killed the Anabaptists. They were a threat to everyone. Yeah. Everybody did. Okay, the Protestants did, the Catholics did. Nobody liked the Anabaptists. Okay, now the Anabaptists finally did. After as time went on, they found some. They had a few little weirdnesses. Okay, the Anabaptists weren't perfect. They had a little side trip into Munster, Germany, where they took over a city, or a group of Anabaptists, I should say. There was not a central headquarters of the Anabaptists. The Anabaptists finally. 30, 40, 50 years later, had somebody who lived long enough to start writing a lot, and his name was Menno Simons. And he became popular, was very talented, very prolific leader, and so the Anabaptists became known as followers of Menno Simons or Mennonites. So if you want to know what happened to the Anabaptists, they became the Mennonites. And what's interesting about that is like 100 years later, when the Baptist universe began, which is our third point, when the Baptist universe began, they were very much trying to separate themselves that we're not the Anabaptists. We're not those guys. They didn't really want, so there's kind of just, they like the whole believer's baptism thing, but a lot of the other stuff about Anabaptists, and one of the distinctives of the Anabaptists and the Mennonites is pacifism. It's a very pacifistic, and in fact, like the Amish are actually a split isn't quite the right word, but it's a derivative out of the Mennonites. But they're very pacifistic. And so the Baptists didn't want anything to do with them. They didn't want to do with each other. So the Baptist church is not really a descendant of the Anabaptists as well. The third, and this is what most people tend to go with these days, it's an outgrowth of the English separatist movement. Okay, the English separatist movement. Now again, the English Reformation is a little different than either the Zwinglian or the Lutheran Reformation, in that the Catholic Church was pretty much in control here in England up until the time of Henry VIII. I am grossly oversimplifying this story. And Henry VIII wanted an heir, couldn't get an heir, so he decided he was going to just kick his way out of the Baptist, or just kick out the Catholic Church, created the Anglican Church. And then the Anglican Church, then you had a series of reform movements within British Anglicanism, which was for a while it was just kind of considered Catholic light, what we would call Catholic light. And then there were people that would try to purify the church, Puritans, that would try to purify the church to make it more Protestant, more like what the Zwinglian Reformation was. Okay, there's other elements in there. Scotland was involved. John Knox, he's up there as part of this. We're a little bit later, but the English there was some that said, the Puritans are just not doing the job. They just can't do the job. We can't purify this. We need to just separate, and these were called the separatists, the English separatists. And so a lot of them left England to go to other places, most notably Holland. Okay, and in Holland there was a guy named John Smyth, or perhaps it's Smythe, it's S-M-Y-T-H, who is generally credited with being the first English Baptist, okay, in terms of just general naming of people, okay. So John Smyth was the first English Baptist, in that he gets over to England, he says, or he gets over to Holland, he says, we need to be baptized again. He can't find somebody to baptize himself, so he baptizes himself. Then this congregation goes on for a while, and then he realizes, wait a minute, I needed to be baptized by immersion. Now this doesn't go over well with his congregation, but he says, we need to find somebody that can baptize us by immersion. So actually it causes a split. So John Smyth and his group actually go to the Mennonites, because the Mennonites will baptize him, and then Thomas Helwys is left in charge of the church in Holland. Okay, now Thomas Helwys in 1611 writes the first Baptist Confession of Faith. Okay, and we're going to talk about those in just a minute. And so then you had Thomas Helwys starts that Baptist church. He's in charge of that Baptist church. It actually comes back to England, and then in England in 1616, I think, is when it's generally considered to be the first Baptist church in England. Okay. First Baptist church in America is usually considered to be 1638. Now keep in mind, all of these dates, times, and places are about with 85% certainty. And what I mean by that is, like, was there another group of believers meeting before that? Quite possibly. Of course, if you're a landmark, you say, yeah, absolutely there was. But 1638, Roger Williams in Rhode Island is usually credited with being creating the first Baptist church. He, again, came from England, very well connected, very interesting guy, very well-connected guy in England, came over to the United States, or the British North American colonies, excuse me, and became a Baptist then. So that's kind of, so most of the time in the U.S., when you look at the Baptist history, you're either a landmark or you're from the English separatists. I favor the English separatists. It's not a hill I'm going to die on. If somebody wants to argue that they're a landmark, okay. When you get down to what the Baptist distinctives are, they're generally pretty much the same. But it's one of those things. Now, when you start talking about the development of what it means to be a Baptist, you have to go through this series of English confessions. And I'm strictly speaking with English confessions. Onken, of course, had a confession, but his was in German. Okay, and it does not really affect what was going on here in the U.S. And so I'm predominantly talking about U.S. Baptists as opposed to European Baptists, and well, although English Baptists are part of that as well. So there's several of these confessions that come out and are kind of standardized in the Baptist universe. There's a few that get talked about quite a bit. Okay, the first one, of course, is Thomas Helwig's confession. Thomas Helwig's confession was in 1611. It was the first one. It's interesting because it was called a declaration of faith of English people remaining at Amsterdam in Holland in 1611. And again, this is because a group of his had left Holland. The John Smith group had gone to the Mennonites, who I believe were in Germany or the Holy Roman Empire at the time, had gone out, and so the ones that left. So Helwig wanted to say, listen, this is what we believe. So this, as far as we know in English, is the first systematic explanation of what it means to be a Baptist. Okay, that came out in 1611. I've lost my notes. Where'd they go? Oh, there they are. You had several others. In 1660, there was the Standard Confession, subscribed by certain elders, deacons, brethren, met in London in the first month of March 1660, and many others unto whom they belong in London and in several counties of the nation who are of the same faith with us. Okay, so 1660, that's the Standard Confession. And I'm going to talk about the distinctions between these. In 1689, there's what's called the Second London Confession. Okay, the Second London Confession. In 1833, there's New Hampshire Convention, Confession. And I'm talking about these, so you can go back. They're all online. You can find any one of these, and probably 100 others. Okay, you can to just kind of see, because I'll be referring back to them as we go through. So just kind of giving you what my sources are. So the New Hampshire Confession in 1833. Then, of course, there is the Baptist Faith and Message. Now, the Baptist Faith and Message is the Southern Baptist Church's statement of faith, the Southern Baptist Convention statement of faith. Okay, the Southern Baptist Convention first wrote their Baptist Faith and Message in 1925. Then it was revised in 1960, and then it was revised again in 2000. I think those are the 3 years. But it's been revised twice. So it was written once and revised twice. Okay, so the last time was in 2000. So oftentimes nowadays when people start want an explanation of what do Baptists believe, they go to what they say is the Baptist Faith and Message. Like modern, like if a current writer writing for the New York Times wanted to write an article about what do Baptists believe, he or she would probably go to the Baptist Faith and Message, largely because the Southern Baptist Convention is the largest Baptist denomination in the U.S. It's actually the second largest denomination overall in the U.S. Okay, the largest is the Catholic Church. There are actually more Baptists than there are Catholics, but there are more Catholics than there are Southern Baptists. Does that make sense? So there's something like 14 million members of the Southern Baptist Convention. Although it's something like 11% of the population, so there's like 30 million Baptists in the U.S., 14 million of them are Southern Baptists. Okay, so to kind of give you an idea. Then the other 15, 16 million are divided up between, I don't know, somewhere in the area of 400 and 750 different denominations, something like that. I don't, you know. But, so you got these various things, and then of course, every Baptist church, that's what EBC stands for, every Baptist church has its own statement of faith. They all do. I defy you to find a church that doesn't have its own statement of faith. Okay. However, sometimes a Baptist church, you'll go on a Baptist church's website and they will say, we ascribe to the Second London Confession, 1689. Or we ascribe, and because I found in the last week, I have found churches that do both, refer to the London Confession of 1689 and the New Hampshire Confession of 1833. Now, I know, part of you thinking, well, why are we dealing with these 100-year-old statements of faith? Why are we dealing with this? You know, which is one of those kind of interesting things because, you know, we are all basing, you know, our guide is a 2,000-year-old book. So it's like a 100-year-old confession is new, you know. But be that as it may. So some of these are, and they'll say, this is just a revision. Like when the Baptists Faith and Methods first was done in 1925, they pointed out that this is just a revision of the New Hampshire Confession of 1833, kind of thing. Now, there are some differences and about them, and we'll get to some of them in a minute. One of the things, if you look over on your, let's see, do I want to go to that here? Yeah, if you turn over, there's the first two words I want to talk about are the difference between the universal church and the local church. The universal church and the local church, because this is one of those things that not all Baptists agree on. Okay, so the Bible in the New Testament, the Bible talks about, especially the epistles talk about the word ecclesia, which means called out assembly, called out body of believers, and that is usually translated church. And we look at that and say that's the church. Okay, and most of the time when we talk about the church, we talk about the church in the context of the body of Christ, or we could talk about it in two ways. We could talk about it in the body of Christ. And when we talk about the church as the body of Christ, we mean it's the sum of all believers, right? Everybody who is a believer is part of the universal church. And one of the distinctions or one of the questions when you look at the New Testament, whenever you see the word church, is to ask yourself, is the writer talking about the universal church, or is he talking about the local church? Now, the local church is, or the visible church, is the visible manifestation of the church. Okay? So, for example, this is the local church. Okay? But when we take this church and the church that's meeting down the road and the people that are meeting over there and the people over there that couldn't make it, that's the universal church. Okay? So you have local church, universal church. Now, not all Baptists agree with that. Like the American Baptist Association and a lot of landmark Baptists would say, no, this is the church. There is no such thing as universal church. If you're not in a church, if you're not in a local church, you are not in the church. Okay, oh, it's on my phone. That's because I had the statement from the American Baptist Association Statement of Faith, where it said that the universal church is that the only manifestation of the church is in the local church. Okay, that is typically your very, very conservative side of the Baptist universe goes there. The majority of Baptists would not ascribe to that. Okay, and this is one of the things about being a Baptist, is there are a lot of things that are different. The next three words, and I've kind of mentioned them again, aspersion, effusion, and immersion are the three different ways to baptize, to be baptized. Okay, so if aspersion is sprinkling, so baptism by sprinkling, effusion is baptism by pouring, and immersion is baptism by immersion, by being dipped under, okay? And we'll get back into that a little bit, and I'll just go to the next three words. Credo Baptist, Paedo Baptist, and a C Baptist, or Say Baptist, okay? So a Credo Baptist, C-R-E-D-O Baptist, is somebody who baptizes believers, like credo, believe, creed, okay? Paedo Baptist is somebody who baptizes children, like pediatrician, so a Paedo Baptist. And a C Baptist, or a Say Baptist, SC, is somebody who baptizes himself. Okay, so George Blaurock was a Say Baptist. He baptized himself. Or maybe it was, I don't know which one was the one that first baptized himself. John Smith was a C Baptist. Okay, and I say that because if you start looking into this kind of stuff, they'll talk about Paedo Baptist, Credo Baptist. They use these words like everybody knows what they mean. Okay, we'll get back to the rest in a minute. All right, back over to every Baptist church is a statement of faith. Now, talking about Baptist distinctives, every Baptist church, generally speaking, is in agreement, and for example, with things like the Nicene Creed. So I'm not going to go over some of the things like the nature of God, nature of Christ, the Trinity, all, that salvation is by grace through faith. All of those kind of things are generally in agreement as far as Baptists go. Okay, you're not going to find many Baptist churches. Now, there's always one because Baptists are a weird bunch. Okay, but you're not going to find a Baptist church where they say, "Well, yeah, we believe in God, but we don't believe Jesus was the Son of God." That's just not going to happen. Okay, so again, I'm just kind of focusing on what are the distinctives, what makes a Baptist church different from, say, a Lutheran church, or what makes a Baptist church different from a Presbyterian church. Okay, so generally speaking, they're in agreement on that with a couple of exceptions, and I'll get to that hopefully before the end of the time. Okay, so any questions so far before we get into like what are the Baptist distinctives? What is it that makes a Baptist church distinctive? Or what is it that makes a believer, yeah, anyone but Paul? I'm just kidding.
See,
This Paul.
does that just refer to these few individuals who baptize themselves of necessity because there's no one else to do it? Or is
Yes.
there some doctrine of people
No,
say, yeah, you should go
no,
and
just to
baptize
those that have done it.
just those few individuals?
Yeah, they'll just say like John Smith practiced sea baptism, say baptism, yes.
My only question is, my personal example, I was baptized infant Presbyterian, but then I was convicted as an adult to have adult baptism. Is there any category for that? Or is that Anabaptism?
Well, it depends on who you ask. Actually, let me hold that thought
Okay.
when we get down to believers'
Well,
baptism.
I'm hoping it's a good question because it happens to a lot of Christians.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess the short answer to that is like a Baptist would look and say, well, you weren't actually baptized as an infant. You weren't biblically baptized as an infant. You were
That was
baptized.
the conviction
Yeah.
I came on.
But you know, the other thing is, there's no law that says, there's no rule in the Bible that says you can only be baptized once. You know that? I mean, I've been baptized twice. Okay? I don't know, has anybody beat that? Anybody more than twice?
As an adult.
As an adult. You know, there's no, and in fact, I've been told, I've never been able to verify this in writing, but I've been told by somebody who knows a lot about this kind of stuff, that for a period of time, baptism, because baptism is a requirement for membership in almost all Baptist churches, that anytime you switch Baptist churches, you had to get baptized again. That if you want to join this church, you have to be baptized at this church. Okay, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. There's, you know, you're just demonstrating the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, assuming you were doing it by immersion. Okay, so again, you can be baptized more than once. You know, no problem with that.
It's called double dipping.
Double dipping, yes, yes.
There are those who would contend that one Lord, one faith, one baptism speaks to the issue of whether you ought to be rebaptized, but that depends on interpretation of that passage. But there are those who maintain
You're
that.
delving into covenant theology.
Yeah, let's,
Yeah, I was gonna say, some people looked at me as weird because I got baptized again when I was in Israel, but my second reason was because I just wanted to walk in the shoes of Jesus.
right. Well, that was my second time was in the Jordan River too.
Yeah.
But I didn't say, oh, no, I've already done that. It's like,
Yeah,
you know, a Baptist, and I'm skipping ahead, a Baptist believes that baptism is a symbolic act. It represents the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. And so why not do it more than once? Okay? It only has one meaning, but yes, Paul.
I just want to raise a contrarian voice. There we go, here I go. I'm in favor of one baptism, and I would not be rebaptized on principle because I think you should get baptized as often as you get saved, which I think happens one time. I got married to Lisa. I'm not going to do another marriage ceremony. Someone went, oh, you need to do this ceremony again. No. Got married one time and that's it. We're married for good. So I am one of those, maybe a minority voice, who would feel if it's a real baptism, don't do it again. So there it is. There's the challenge.
All right.
Gauntlet.
Paul wouldn't do it again.
No.
I've already done it again, so I can't, you know, so I'm like, you know, so there you go. There, yeah. So, yeah. So, all right, so,
Let's just go right.
right.
Billy Graham got baptized 3 times.
Billy Graham got baptized 3 times. Well, there you go. All right. Okay, so, yeah. What are the Baptist distinctives? When we start talking about the Baptist distinctives, well, the first Baptist distinctive in almost every Baptist statement has something to the effect of the authority of the Bible. Okay, the authority of the Bible. So, in fact, if let's see here, I've got to keep my thing straight. So the New Hampshire Baptist Confession of 1833 says, number 1, of the Scriptures, we believe that the Holy Bible was written by men divinely inspired and is a perfect treasure of heavenly instruction. It's God for its authors, salvation for its end, the truth without any mixture of error for its matter. that it reveals the principles by which God will judge us, and therefore is and shall remain to the end of the world the true center of Christian union and the supreme standard by which all human conduct, creeds, and opinions should be tried. Okay, so that is the New Hampshire Baptist Confession, the New Hampshire Baptist Confession of 1833. Okay, and just about all Baptist confessions, if they don't start with that, it's in there somewhere. Okay, and this comes back out of the whole idea from the Reformation, the sola scriptura, the Bible only kind of thing. And so they all of them will say Bible is only. Now, what they do with the Bible, that's a whole different story. Okay, but Bible, and of course, this is comparative or contrast to like the Catholic Church, where the Catholic Church has the church tradition is as important, or at least on par with the Bible, word of the Pope, and all of that kind of thing. Okay, so again, that doesn't mean that even in the Baptist tradition they don't have some decision making that involves the Wesleyan quadrilateral or something like that, where you take into account reason and all of that kind of stuff to make your decisions. But it always comes back to the Bible. It always comes back to what's in the Bible. And again, this kind of goes back to like the Zwinglian idea, like if it's not in the Bible, we don't do it. Okay, so that one should be pretty easy to understand. Okay, so we start with the Bible. Okay, so if you go to a church and the guy gets up there and says, I am the authority here, then you're not in a Baptist church. Okay, so that's the first one, authority of the Bible. The next one, in fact, the next two tend to get mixed up a lot. Okay, soul liberty or soul competence is the first one. Soul liberty or competence. Soul liberty, soul competence. And next one down there is the priesthood of the believer. Now these two tend to get mixed up. They get conflated. They get put together and they say they're the same thing. Well, they aren't actually. Okay? Soul liberty is the Baptist idea that because you are made in the image of God, because individuals are made in the image of God, you have the ability to commune with God, you have the ability to have a relationship with God, you have the ability to approach God for your needs, wants, things like that. Okay? That it is your responsibility as an individual to determine what the Bible says, what is right, what is wrong. Okay? An example to that is in Acts 17:11. In Acts 17:11, we have the story of the Bereans, and that is where Paul preaches to the Bereans, and it says the Bereans were more noble because they took what Paul said and went home and searched the scriptures to see if it was so. Now you think about it, if there was ever an authority, it would be the Apostle Paul. And yet the Bereans go, I like what you're saying, Paul. I'll get back to you on whether I agree with it. So to a certain extent, that's kind of one illustration of what soul liberty, soul competence is. That the individual being made in the image of God, has the competence, the ability to commune with God. Okay, so there isn't the necessity or the opportunity for an individual relationship with God. Okay, now we look at that and we think, well, that's, when we think of priesthood of the believer, that's kind of what we think. But actually, priesthood of the believer, when most people talk about priesthood of the believer, we think, okay, well, we now have a great high priest, or let us boldly approach him. Hebrews 4, yeah, I think that's Hebrews 4. Let's boldly approach the thing. So we don't need a priest. No. Okay. Priesthood of the believer is that you are a priest. Okay. Not that you don't need a priest, that you are the priest. And we are a kingdom of priests, Peter tells us in 1 Peter 2. Okay? And so if you start thinking about that, you start thinking about, okay, well, what did the priest have to do? What was the responsibility of the priest? And so when we take the priesthood of the believer, it isn't that something has been removed. It's like now you have the same responsibility that the priest had. And that includes things like intercession, representation, witness, and a responsibility to those around you. Okay? It isn't just that, hey, because the priesthood of the believer, I don't have to do anything anymore. No, it's because the priesthood of the believer, you have to do a lot. Okay? There's a lot more that you do. Okay? It isn't just, priesthood of the believer, I can approach God. It's true, you can. And this is why these soul liberty and priesthood of the believer tend to get mixed up or conflated. You think, well, I'm approaching God. It's like, and there's like, some overlap. In fact, E.Y. Mullins, who was the He was the chairman of the Southern Baptist Convention for many years, from 1899 to like 1925 or something like that. Considered soul liberty to be the Baptist distinctive, not baptism by immersion. Okay, it was soul liberty was the Baptist distinctive. Okay, so again, it's that working out of being made in the image of God, that you can have an individual, that you are capable, an individual of approaching God, and that God wants to approach you. Okay, I'm at 9:48. So, priesthood of the believer. Okay, the next one, baptism for believers. Now, there's something I should have added to this, okay, in terms of ordinances. Okay, but the Baptist distinctive is who gets baptized. Okay, not necessarily how. We do not have a record. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but we don't have a record of a believer being baptized before 1641, immersed before 1641. Okay, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. I'm just saying there's no record of anyone being immersed before 1641. Okay, so the point of believers' baptism, or of baptism for a Baptist, is who is baptized. And that is that it's a believer that's baptized. Now, what's interesting about this is that you take like the Methodist Church or Presbyterian Church or any church like that, where you baptize infants, and that's one way to get people into your church. Well, you were baptized as Presbyterian, you said?
Yes.
So you're baptized as a Presbyterian, so when you're 10 or 15, you say, how old are you? Or what church are you? I'm a Presbyterian because I was baptized a Presbyterian. Okay, I was baptized into the church. In the early part of the 19th century, during the Great Awakening, one of the disadvantages that the Baptists had over the Methodists is that the Baptists had to recruit all of their members. Okay, whereas the Methodists could say, well, you were baptized into the Methodist church, so you're a Methodist, kind of thing. So the Baptists had to recruit all of their members. They had to get all of their members, had to become believers. And so it's baptism. Now, immersion comes from, the idea of baptism by immersion is like 90%, 95%, probably higher than that, of the Baptist churches in the U.S. are going to baptize by immersion. And that is based on the fact that the word comes from baptizo, which means to immerse or to dip. And then the examples are, well, you know, Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch. Go down into the water, came up out of the water.
Well, that's a record, though, right?
Pardon me?
You said there was no record prior to 16 something,
To 1640.
but Philip is a record.
Yes, but the people who are Baptist by or sprinkling or pouring say that, you know, going into the water could have just gone and stand there and then be poured while standing in the water. So, yeah, you go down because that way you don't have to clean up the floor. Yeah, you don't.
Does the Baptists in general consider the baptism of Jesus by John the Baptist the first baptism?
You know, I took a class once with a Moody extension course once. And we were talking about that question. It's like, what did Jesus' baptism indicate? Because was it a baptism of repentance? Because that's what John the Baptist was doing. Well, what was Jesus repenting? What was Jesus repenting from? So it's like, okay, and so it was, you know, the question that we kind of discussed was that no, that his baptism had more to do with either an Old Testament mikvah or an anointing as a priest.
Or a fulfillment of Scripture?
Well, that's what he said. The Scriptures must be fulfilled. Yeah. But I have never seen a Baptist refer to Jesus' baptism as the first baptism. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm just saying I've never seen it. But so it's baptism. So it's a baptism by immersion, and baptism itself, and the Lord's Supper. This should have been added in here. Okay, this is a mistake on my part. Are the two ordinances of the church, and they are ordinances. Okay, the difference between an ordinance and a sacrament is a sacrament. The implication of that word is that there is something special about the act. There is some element of grace, not partaken, whatever the opposite of partaken is, received as a result of doing it. You are somehow closer to God as a result of having taken baptism, or having been baptized, or having been taken the Lord's Supper or communion, whatever you want to call it, than you were before doing it.
Which is more ritualistic.
Well, I mean, they both could be ritualistic. I'm just, it's the question when you call it a sacrament, that's the implication you're giving, that there's something sacred about it, okay? Whereas in the Baptist church, it is an ordinance. It is a command. It's something we're to do. It is to remember the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. It is to recognize, that his blood on the cross. Okay, so it's a memorial. It's it's symbolic. Okay, it doesn't do. Some Baptists will get up there and say, being a Baptist does not save you. It only gets you wet. Okay, doesn't save you. You're not going to become more. And being baptized more than once isn't going to get you saved either.
So there's no regeneration in
Correct.
baptism.
Right. Right.
Or in the Lord's Supper.
Or in the Lord's Supper.
Or in the Lord's
Right. There are some Baptist groups that perform a third ordinance, and that is foot washing. Okay, and that is based on the idea that Jesus washed the disciples' feet, and as he gets done, he says, "What I've done for you, do for others." And so they say, "Well, Jesus said it. I believe it. That settles it." Right. Most Baptist churches do not celebrate foot washing, and the reason. And we'll just move right beyond the whole ick factor. But most of them is because foot washing is not mentioned in the New Testament, in the epistles, as something that should be done, nor is there any record in the New Testament church of it being done as an ordinance. Whereas there are clearly baptism and the Lord's Supper are talked about quite a bit. Okay, so baptism and the Lord's Supper. Baptism is for believers. 95% of Baptists are Baptist by immersion. 99%, are Baptist by immersion. And this is what, really, you don't want to say it's 100% because even here in this church, we've had situations where somebody wanted to get baptized, somebody accepted Christ, wants to get baptized, and for one reason or another, cannot get into a baptismal tank. Okay? The last time I know of here it was a guy that was in a wheelchair of some sort that just could not get into a baptismal tank. And so I said, okay, well, we're going to baptize by pouring. Okay. I mean, those who say baptism by pouring it's the washing of the body as opposed to the representation. You could look at it that way, kind of thing. But most Baptists go with, it's immersion. It's got to be all the way under. My favorite baptism story, I've told it before, but where we went to this what was called man camp, where guys were like 1,000 of us there, and they had this mass baptism afterwards, where there's this lake of freezing cold water, and there are these two pastors in the middle, and everybody who had accepted Christ or had wanted to get baptized lined up. I was not one of them. I've already been baptized twice, which apparently is one more time than I need to. But so there was this line of people going to come in to get baptized. And so they would come into the water, and the two pastors are there in waders, because the water was cold, right? And they got into the water, and one would grab one arm, and one would grab the other, and they would say something to the effect of, the usual, do you believe Jesus died, and what's your testimony, et cetera, I saved. I'm going to baptize you in the name of Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Push the person down, and then the two of them would rip the guy's arms up, pulling him back up, push him out, grab the next one in. Okay? Guy after guy after guy after guy. And then this one guy comes in, they do the whole thing. Do you believe Jesus died? Yes, I do. You accepted him as your Savior? Yes, I do. Then I baptize you in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Goes down, and as the guy goes back, he bends at the waist. So, they're like throwing him back, and he should have just gone, but he bends at the waist, so his head doesn't go underwater. Right? The crowd went nuts. It's like, do it again, do it again. They pulled the guy, all right, come on, we got to do it again. It was a split over baptism right there. But be that as it may. So, okay, baptism for believers. Autonomy of the local church. Autonomy of the local church. Okay, again, this is the local church. Okay, so in the Baptist community, in the Baptist universe, you are not going to see a very strong external control feature over the local church. Okay, even the Southern Baptist Convention will say that every congregation is autonomous. Now, where the Southern Baptists get you is, as I understand, I've never been a Southern Baptist, but there's part of being the Southern Baptist Convention is that maybe they loaned you the money to buy the building, maybe they you know, all of your staff are on their insurance or something like that. So there are other ways, but technically the congregation is independent. Okay, so the autonomy of the local church. And this kind of gets back to the English separatist movement. If you think about it, it's like, okay, so they didn't, you know, the Anglican church in England was a state-controlled church. And the Baptists said, we don't want to be controlled by the state. We are independent. One of the things that distinguishes Roger Williams as a founder of the First Baptist Church is that his church was like, no, we are not going to be controlled by the state, by the colony, by the government. Okay. Now, prior to, for a long period of time, even in the United States, there were state-controlled churches. Okay. So it wasn't until the early part of the 19th century that we really eliminated state-controlled churches in the U.S. And by state-controlled churches, I mean like state, like Illinois, Virginia, whatever, as opposed to a federal. Because, you know, the U.S. Constitution talks about freedom of religion, the whole idea of separation of church and state, that wall of separation. That's not in the Constitution. That's a letter that Thomas Jefferson sent to the Danbury Baptist Association. Danbury? Something with a D. It might be Danvers, Danbury. Thomas Jefferson writes this letter and says, no, there's a wall of separation between church and state. Okay? That's not the Constitution. Okay? But be that as it may, so a Baptist would say, no, no state church. No state church, no external control. Okay? And even in the Baptist associations that you have, you're not going to see a lot of external control. Okay, which leads into the next thing, congregational church polity. Church polity, P-O-L-I-T-Y, comes from the same word we get politics, police, all of that. Polity is how you organize your church. Okay, how do you organize your church? Okay, congregationalism says that the congregation governs the church. All churches tend to fall into one of three categories. You're either an Episcopal, a Presbyter, or a congregational church. An Episcopal structured church has a clear chain of command. The Catholic Church is an Episcopal church. There's the Pope, there's cardinals, there's archbishops, there's bishops, there's priests. Okay, that's the Episcopalian church is an Episcopal church. Okay, there's a chain of command. Okay, the Presbyterian model or Presbyterian model is that there are groups. Presbyters, you know, there are synods, you know, there's again, I'm not in one, but there's like a committee that oversees the committees, that oversees the committees, that oversees the committees. Okay, so the Presbyterian Church has that, and it's an external control. Okay, in the Baptist universe, it's congregational, it's congregationalism, and again, it's congregationalism with the Baptist baptism by immersion and all that kind of, not to be confused with the congregational church. That's a whole different thing. Congregational churches are pretty much Calvinistic, infant baptism, but local church controlled. Okay, so it's congregational church polity. So in a Baptist church, it's the congregation that governs the church. Regardless of who the pastor is or what, it's the congregation that works. So why are Baptist church meetings notorious for being contentious? Well, congregation controls, sole competence. I'm created in the image of God. I am capable of making this decision on my own, and I am part of the group that runs this church. That's part and parcel of being a Baptist church. The problem that we have in the Baptist church is that we don't deal well with disagreement. That we just kind of think that everybody needs to get along, and when somebody disagrees with you, it's like, oh, no, thing is right. See, I'm perfectly comfortable with looking at Paul and saying, Paul, sorry, you're wrong. No, just kidding, But now, as far as whether I've ever been
Wrong.
what's the word? Wrong. Yeah, that word. But we don't deal well with it. Okay. And again, there are some challenges to that. The larger the church gets, the more difficult it is to run. I can't imagine Saddleback having a meeting. Saddleback is a Southern Baptist church. I can't imagine Saddleback having a meeting. It's got, 10, 15,000 people, where they talk about what color they should paint the church. I just can't imagine that occurring, okay? But, it's part of the congregational dynamic to say, listen, we're going to delegate this decision to the leaders of the church, okay? So, It's a congregational church polity, yes.
Isn't it true that Robert's Rules of Order was written by a Baptist?
I do not know that.
I think I have a copy of it that says at the front of it.
Oh. Yeah, it's interesting to know. So, okay, congregational church polity. That leads into the next thing is 2 church officers in a Baptist church. There are 2 church officers, pastor and a deacon. Now I know some people are saying, wait a minute, where are the elders? Well, here's how the Baptists look at it. In the New Testament, there are 3 words that are usually translated. One of them is translated overseer, one of them is translated bishop, one of them is translated pastor. Actually, the 2 words are presbyter and episcopus, which is where you get Presbyterian and Episcopalian come from that word. But those words in the Baptist view all refer to the same person. So if you say, we don't have an elder at our church, yes, we do. The elder at a Baptist church is the pastor. Okay? So there's an elder, pastor, and there are deacons. Okay? Can there be more than one elder at a Baptist church? Yes. There is no rule that says you can only have one elder at a Baptist church. Okay? But now that is more of a Reformed Baptist. We'll talk about that in a minute. But typically, and this started in the 1920s, it was Strong's theology. Is anybody familiar with Strong's theology? Augustus Strong wrote this very seminal theology book that was used amongst the conservative Baptists for years and years and years. He was the one that first kind of came down hard and said, there should only be one elder at a Baptist church. Okay? But, and that's the pastor. Okay? So the pastor of the church is the elder. Can you have more than one? Sure. You can have more than one. But there are only 2 offices in the church, pastor and deacon. There are no apostles, prophets, evangelists, okay, as officers of the church. You can have people in the church that you call an apostle, that's fine, but they're not an officer of the church, okay? Regenerate and baptized church membership. Regenerate, saved, and baptized church membership, okay? One does not become a member of a Baptist church simply because you live in the community. Okay, in order to become a member of a Baptist church, you have to verify 2 things. Number 1, that you have accepted Christ as your personal Savior, and that you have been baptized in the appropriate way after believing. So if you are somebody who says, yes, I accepted Christ as my personal Savior when I was 25, were you baptized? Yes, I was baptized as a Presbyterian. Well then, according to almost all Baptist churches, they would say, you should not be a member of this church. You have to be baptized as a believer. Again, the question of baptism for a Baptist is who is baptized? Okay, believers. Believers' baptism, regenerate church membership. Okay, so the believers are all, the members of the church are all believers. Okay, and then the last thing is separation. The last thing that the Baptists, part of the Baptist distinctives is separation. That a Baptist think, come out from among them and be separate. And both this is ecclesiastical, and this kind of gets into, ties into the congregational, the autonomy of the local church. And that is why, one of the reasons why Baptists split all the time, or why Baptist community or organizations split all the time, because they say, well, you know what? If we can't come to an agreement, then we're going to just split. And so you've got a history of organizations splitting through the Baptist church. Okay, so it's ecclesiastical and personal. So that if you're a member of a Baptist church, it's one of the Baptist distinctives that people expect you to act like it. And I mean that in a good way. Okay, that does not, again, because as a Baptist you can say, I have the image of God, I have the sole liberty to make these decisions. That doesn't mean, that you get to lord it over your neighbors. I am more holy than you because I'm a Baptist. No, you are a kingdom of priests. You are there to represent the church, represent God, represent the truth, okay? If you look on the back real quick, I talked about some of these terms real quick, and I want to kind of just go down Paedo-Baptist things, and I thought about defining this as things that split Baptist churches. The things most likely, there are 2 things that are in history that are the most likely to split a Baptist church, okay, or split a Baptist organization, okay? The first one is Calvinism, and the second one is slavery, okay? So Calvinism, and that's having to do with election being the idea or the question of who gets saved. Does God choose people to be saved and therefore people that are not saved? Or do people have the ability, do all people have the free ability to be saved? So again, this is another gross oversimplification of the thing. So Calvinism on one side starts from God's sovereignty and says in his sovereignty, God chooses who is going to be saved. He knows who's going to be saved. He knows that there are people that are not going to be saved. That's the whole tulip thing, the total depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, perseverance of the saints. Okay? The first Baptist thing, Helois's confession was very, very, So that was pushed by Calvin. About a generation or so later, another guy came along, Jacob Arminius, who said, wait a minute, that's a little harsh. Let's look at this from the perspective of God's love. God in his love would give everybody the right to be. Again, gross oversimplification. But these two sides have been splitting Baptist churches for centuries. Helois's first thing, let me find it, is very, very Arminian. Okay? Man may fall away from the grace of God. Okay? Therefore, let no man presume to think that because he has or once had grace, therefore he shall always have grace. The Calvinists in the room are shivering over that. Okay? But this is the first Baptist confession. Okay? However, the London Confession of 1689, and again, one of the reasons why these things come up is because, okay, the Calvinists are getting too strong, the Arminians are getting too strong. I mean, really, the real difference between a Calvinist and Arminian is the Calvinists are absolutely convinced that they are right. And the Arminians are absolutely convinced that the Calvinists are wrong. Okay? But, be that as it may. So, in the early part of the church, and I've only got I'm going to go to like 10:15, so if anybody you need to leave, okay. In the early part of the church, they were generally, when you looked at the calling, the selection, it was either general or it was particular. A general calling meant that God's call to salvation went to everyone. God so loved the whole world, okay? Whereas if you were particular, it said God's call went out to the particular group, to the elect, okay? And so you had general Baptists and you had particular Baptists, okay? I will tell you, the majority of Baptist churches in the U.S. are general Baptists, okay? There are particular Baptists. They don't call particular Baptists. They're usually called Reformed Baptist churches now, okay? So that's General Baptist. So you have the General Baptist. You have the General Association of Regular Baptists. Our church is a General Baptist church. If you look at but the doctrinal statements are usually written in like the The Baptist Confession of 1833 is written in such a way, if you're going to go through it, that Calvinists and Arminians should be able to coexist. Okay? So you had the General Baptists, you had the Particular Baptists, okay, also known as the Reformed Baptists. In the early part of the 19th century, in like 1815, the first denomination of Baptists got together. It was called the Triennial Convention. Okay? The Triennial Convention got together largely to create missionaries. They wanted to get active in the mission work. There were several very hyper-Calvinist groups that said, well, wait a minute, God's already chosen who, so we don't need to do that. And so they said, we're going to split off of them, and that's where we get the Primitive Baptists. Primitive Baptists are very, very Calvinistic. Now, most Calvinists are not this Calvinistic, but this is like hyper-Calvinist or whatever. So your Primitive Baptists, that's where you're going to get, they're very often landmark, they're very often very much bare bones kind of church, okay? Non-missionary focused, minimal leadership in the church. That's a primitive Baptist church. Ironically, there is such a thing as a progressive Primitive Baptist church. Google it. I'm telling you, it exists. There's a couple in the Chicago area. On the other side of the coin, you said, no, wait a minute. We need to go out into all the world, and that's where we get the missionary Baptist churches. So missionary Baptist churches were the results. So these two groups said, okay, well, we're not going to do this missionary stuff. And so they became the Primitive Baptist Church. And it didn't have primitive didn't have the negative connotation at the time when they first that it kind of does not. I think primitive. Why would I want to be called primitive? You know, some of them, like another reference to themselves is old school, called old school Baptist churches, okay, primitive Baptist church. And that's the missionary Baptist is those that said, no, we are going to take the Great Commission seriously, okay? There's also such a thing as the Seventh-day Baptist Church, okay? There is a Seventh-day Baptist Church. Guess what the Seventh-day Baptist Church does? They worship on Saturday. Now, a Seventh-day Baptist Church, just based on that, and again, there is a Seventh-day Association. There's a Seventh-day Baptist Church in Chicago. I suspect that they are more along the line of a covenant theologian group as opposed to dispensational, meaning they see a continuity between Israel and the church. That's a whole nother discussion. Maybe not next week. No, I'm going to take too long to do that. But there is a Seventh-day. But they thought, based on their understanding of the Scripture, they said, well, you know what? We think church should be on Saturday. And everyone else says, no, church should be on the first day of the week, the Lord's Day. We said, well, you know, separation, seventh characteristic. We're going to start our own. Okay. There are some within the Baptist tradition that want to really make it clear that there are Arminians, and that's the Free Will Baptist Church. Okay, so there's Free Will Baptist Church. That's Welch College in Tennessee. We have a couple of friends in Taiwan who are kind of missionaries over there, part of the Free Will Baptist Convention, the Free Will Baptist Church. In 1845, the Triennial Convention split because the Triennial Convention, which was this first denomination, said that, you know what, we've been looking at this and we cannot support in good conscience any missionary who owns slaves. And there was a large group of Southerners in there that said, oh, let's hold the thought there, you know. I was going to say they said back up the truck, but not in 1845. They didn't. Back up the carriage, or something like that. So in 1845, the Triennial Convention split into what was called the Southern Baptist Convention and then the Northern Baptist Convention. The Northern Baptist Convention said, well, we're going to have, we're not going to support any missionaries that are slaveholders. The Southern Baptist Convention said, yes, we could. So yes, the Southern Baptist Convention was born out of a desire to protect slavery. This is not something they deny, okay? As the Northern Baptist, now, of course, over the years, in fact, the Southern Baptist Convention has had an African-American president since then, okay? And they've come to grips with that and all that, and it's, you know. But in the 1950s, the Southern Baptist Convention really wanted to get away from the whole, you know, where the Southern Baptist Convention, and the Southern Baptist Convention has grown. There are Southern Baptist churches in all 50 states. Okay, there's a Southern Baptist church in Bolingbrook. I don't know if there's one in Downers Grove. I know there's one in Bolingbrook. It's a mixed congregation, by the way. But the black pastor, white assistant. But they wanted to change their name in the 1950s to the American Baptist Convention. They couldn't do that because the Northern Baptist Convention beat them to it. So the American Baptist Convention today, which is where you get like Northern Seminary in Warrenville, the Northern Baptist Convention is now had changed their name to the American Baptist Convention. Okay, two other things real quick, and I'm out of time. Holiness. There are Holiness Baptist churches. Holiness Baptist churches would be the charismatic side, kind of grew out of the work of Charles Finney in the early part of the 19th century. And then Landmark Baptist churches, I actually talked about them at the very beginning. Okay. The other interesting thing to think about, and the final thought is this, there's a lot of stuff that is not a Baptist distinctive. You know, it is not a Baptist distinctive that you be a dispensationalist. It is not a Baptist distinctive, you know, how you view end times. Okay. What are some other things? I thought of some others. Running out of energy, time here. Any questions? I ask any questions knowing there's no time for questions. Anyone but Paul, because we've already determined that he's wrong. No, I'm just kidding. Paul, that's great. Any questions, anything? If you have any questions, by all means, ask. Again, this is something that could have easily been taken an entire summer, or, you know, 12, one lesson for each one of these kind of things. I just wanted you to get the big picture of this is what it means to be a Baptist. Okay. Any questions? Rick, you have the look. You just want to get out?
No, I just want to talk to you. That's
Okay.
And he said, ask